All right, so we're going to get started. Class number 3. I'm assuming everyone's here, and it's 5:31. Tonight's class is on budget and schedule. Exciting. So kind of my introduction. So building is really fun. Building houses, building communities, building everything is fun. Budget and schedule is not all that fun, but it's a crucial part of the process that if we could just build without budgets and schedules, it would be great, but you're almost never going to find a client who's going to go for that. And the challenge is that budget and schedule usually have to come before a project starts. Is traditionally clients want to know how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. So that's the challenge of a project manager, is putting all that information together from many sources. So again, we're, quite a bit of this class is kind of focused on the way I did it, the way Sandy has done it. There's many different ways to put a budget together. In some places, as a contractor, as a project manager, you can just collect bids from suppliers and subcontractors and really not have to do a lot of the work yourself. But in my career, since my company did a lot of the labor of a project and purchased most of the materials for a project, a big part of the bidding process was basically counting boards, putting together lists, very specific lists of materials, like you're looking at. There. That's a good example. How to get to those numbers, and you see that they're pretty exact. You can use formulas, you can use guesstimates, but especially in custom building, every project is so different that relying on formulas is kind of dangerous. You might get close, but you really want to have exact numbers.
And Pete, maybe we should point out to people, that oftentimes you can hire somebody to do all your takeoffs, and they have these, well, it used to be large books, and now it's just, online. And they just look at typical buildings and they spit out for you all of your takeoffs. Now, as Pete said, if you're doing custom, which mostly you're going to be doing, those can be very far off. And as a contractor, you're going to have to eat a lot of that. So I think what both of us have found is it's best you just sit down with those plans and you do your takeoffs, and you're pretty exact with them. And that's what you see. That's what you see here.
Yeah, and there are some places, here too, you can take a set of plans to the lumber yard, and if you can find someone who has the time, traditionally they have done takeoffs. I don't, probably not as much now because everyone's so shorthanded, but I have it listed in this first part that a big part of doing material and labor takeoffs before a project starts is it gives you a real head start. By the time you've looked at all the materials, you really figure out how to build the house. You've anticipated every step. You tend to think through all the problems. So it's just a great prep for a project. To be able to really get down to just real specifics of what materials it's going to take, how they're going to be put together. So that's an important part of the process. So it starts with the plan set, which we looked at in the first class, how to look at a set of plans, but doing a list of materials like this, you really start at the beginning. You start with the foundation. You imagine you're doing foundation work. What materials is that going to take? Once you get through foundation and start framing, you start at the bottom and work up. And it's just a good way to figure out materials, is to really imagine building the house. Start with what materials is it going to take to frame each wall? How many feet of wall at what height is there? You're working from the bottom floor framing, second floor framing, plywood sheathing, rafters, plywood on the roof, interior walls. You're looking at really every part of the house and writing down lists of materials. And the trick, of course, is not missing things. It's a classic to start building the house and realize that you missed a very important component, just that has a price tag attached to it. So
Pete, let's talk a little minute though before we go on about takeoffs and what we mean by that terminology. And you're basically looking at a plan set, and you are doing a materials takeoff from that, meaning that you are doing exactly as Pete said. You're looking at what it's going to take to build the walls and counting the number of 2x4s, 2x6s, etc. That bundle of, an Excel spreadsheet or whatever is called the takeoffs.
Yeah. And so it's not just material takeoffs. Once that's done, you have a comprehensive list like Sandy's showing on the left there. And you're even probably going to have the miscellaneous line item, which just includes odds and ends, is usually in the thousands of dollars of just kind of odd things. But really kind of the first step in the process of putting a bid together, I've found is doing the material list. Really gives you a head start on the project, that you have the big picture of what it's going to take to get all the other bids together, because you've looked at all the components of the project. So the second part of it is labor. Again, in some cases, a construction company is not going to be doing any of the labor. They're going to be subcontracting everything. But again, in my case, I had quite a few staff carpenters doing everything from foundation to framing to exterior finish, roofing in a lot of cases. So the second part of the project was figuring how much time is each thing going to take? How many hours? How many hours for what type of personnel at what pay rate? So again, very, very complex, but kind of the same process as materials. You start at the beginning and work through the project and list out labor functions, framing, sheathing, and that's where you really have to rely on experience quite a bit to know how long it's going to take to do any task. So it's pretty tough just starting out with no experience. It's something that you develop a sense of pretty quickly, depending on how long things take. There's intangibles like how productive is your crew, how much are they charging, how experienced the crew do you have. There's factors like break time is actually a percentage that has to be factored in. So,
Sorry. Hey, Pete, one of the reasons I put these schedules up now is that I think, well, for me, when I start out, just like you said, looking at, hey, you know, how much time is this going to take? How much are you paying everybody and all of that? I typically do this schedule here, which just says, all right, how many days is it going to be? You know, how much square footage is the rough parking, the driveway, etc. Then I start putting days to it. These are, you know, person days to the schedule. And I find that by doing that, even though it's not going to be the schedule that you've got over here, which is, you know, week by week. Yes.
I think you might be sharing the wrong window on your screen. I don't think we're seeing that.
Oh, you're not seeing it.
Yeah, you're seeing the upper right of the PowerPoint. We're not seeing the.
Oh, you're not seeing that. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Let me get this. Share the screen. Here you go. Now, can you see that one?
oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes
so
more
the
sense.
reason that I do it this way in the beginning, and I think it helps, just like it does when you're taking a set of plans and you're starting to look at what it takes to really build the building. You look at a whole project and you start in your mind laying everything out. You know, you're going to get in there in the fall and you're going to be, you know, the mobilization will happen where everybody's bringing in their equipment to get started clearing, chipping. And yeah, that's 10 days. You're not exactly sure what the weather is going to do. So you map that out. And from there, you can start playing around with getting your subs lined up and everything. We typically like to clear in the fall and then watch the site over the winter so that we know a lot more about what's happening, but sometimes you don't have that luxury. And then we start, you know, when the drier weather. And again, you know, these days are set there because ideally that's what it would take. But that does not mean that when you get to rough parking and driveway, they can really finish it in 5 days, right? Because they've got to do some of the rough in work and then, you know, maybe they need a while before they come back or the rain is too much or whatever. But, you know, budget wise, you are, you know, got about 5 days going. And by doing that, I'm going to stop sharing this one and I am going to share this other one here. Can you all see that? This is a week by week activity that Pete put together, and you can see what he's done here. They're basically just 2 examples of how you can help yourself put scheduling together where you hit all those tasks that need to be done.
Yep, and we'll cover this in a little more detail and a little bit later in terms of how to format it. But again, yeah, it's that last one was a good example. There are a lot of ways to put together a labor estimate. You kind of find what works for you because you're imagining the project, you're imagining a crew like with a pile of lumber, and you start the clock, and you start imagining what's going to happen each day. How much are you going to get done? You know, realistically, what is the amount of time that each labor function takes? And again, like I said, what's the makeup of the crew in terms of experienced carpenters, trainees, laborers? What is the price tag for each person per hour? And you see right away it adds up fast. So you can't, you want to try and be as accurate as you can, because you can be way under, way over, and it's a lot of money. It's a big, it's a big price tag for a crew of carpenters on a site for a day. So it's all part of the challenge of putting a budget together. It's easier to just put plenty in, but you may blow the budget out of the water in terms of what a client is gonna accept. So that is a factor with everything we're looking at. Let's see if there's anything. Oh, I have a note about alternates. And again, all the way through the budget process, we talked about this a little bit. You're always trying to think of alternate materials, alternate ways of doing things. Even though you're going to be signing a contract for a project based on what's drawn and specified, so many times there is a need to try and get the budget reduced. So you're constantly looking at ways to come up with maybe less expensive options that can be presented to a client and architect. So it's always in the back of your mind as you're looking at things. If something jumps out that is like, wow, that's really expensive. This is a really expensive way to do this. And I might recommend doing it a different way that's going to be less costly. So it's definitely a big part of your mindset through the whole budgeting process, because you're always kind of thinking of other ways to do it without being kind of obnoxious. There are times when architects get really super annoyed if you come up with too many alternates to their brilliant architecture. So there's a delicate process there.
But Pete, don't you find it really, establishing the relationship with the client and the architect prior to getting out in the field, I think is where oftentimes projects can go south if that established relationship is not got a good foundation prior to starting. Because as everybody always says, as soon as you break ground and start, you will spend money really, really fast. But if you spend time working with the designer, working with the client, having your crew set up, you will in effect save a lot of money. And I think for people, especially somebody like Pete that has done this for so long, he has probably saved, millions of dollars throughout the career, but that often comes with experience. But if you lack experience, and just know that if you take a couple of days to yourself before you dive into a big project, you will gain so much from doing that. I think people starting out oftentimes feel a lot of pressure to rush and be fast. But if you can pull back from that, get yourself, try and do your own takeoffs. Even if you go to the lumberyard and they're willing to do some of your own and see how they compare. Take some time with yourself and also spend a little time with the designer and introduce yourself. Tell them what your experience is and all of that. And the same with the clients. I just think doing that stuff in the beginning just goes a long ways to making the entire project go well. And people begin to trust you a little bit more. When you have questions later on, like, I noticed in the detail, your engineer has called this out in the field. We'd like to do it this way. Everybody's a little bit more willing, I think, to go along with you with that.
Yeah, no question that the budgeting process, it really gives you a head start on a project. The more detailed work, the better if you have time, because it really preps you. Okay, so we're going to move to next topic is subcontractor bids. And in some places, commercial contractors, they collect a big pile of bids from subcontractors, and that kind of takes care of the project. That I remember visiting the project manager for the San Juan Island Hospital, a big Seattle firm. And he just had mountains of bids. He just had files full of bids from subcontractors. And when it came to that phase of the project, he'd just open his files up and pull all these bids out and just like, I'll take this one, and call up and here they come. So we don't do that as much here. The local building economy, again, is quite different, but we do use quite a few subcontractors, and we do try and get the best bids, the tightest bids we can, but like everything, it's a huge challenge. A lot of subcontractors are small. They don't really have office staff. They go home and do billing and bidding at night. So it's it's tough. You end up having to call and bug and yeah, I have this down. Am I pestering too much? It's a big question. I've called, this plumber I work with all the time. I've called them 10 times, and I really need this bid back by this date, and they're trying to get to it, but it's a delicate process. You're relying on them, but you also have to respect their the fact that they're so busy. So that is, hopefully you can get a number of subcontracted bids for each phase of work. From foundation, we have good foundation contractors here now that we can get good competitive bids from. I have never subcontracted framing very much, but there are, definite options for getting subcontractors to do all the framing, and they will actually provide a bid for labor and materials. So it saves a ton of time if you don't have to do the material and labor takeoffs that a framing contractor will. But
and because we're in the islands and sometimes we can track down where people are doing at jobs. I mean, this whole thing about am I bugging somebody too much? People will get stressed in their work, right? But you can track them down and try and make it as easy as possible when you're asking them for a bid. Try and we're going to get into this a little bit later too, but you've got a contract that you're going to work on eventually with somebody, but try and make it pretty specific about what you're asking them to do. It's easier for them to respond to something that is more specific, and you can sometimes track them down at another job and just chat with them a little bit. You just want to avoid adding stress to their life, and you want to invite them in, to work on your project with you, however you can do that. But really, it's again and again and again, it's establishing relationships. You want people to want to work with you. They know that you're going to pay them on time. They know you're going to have a clean site, all of that. And they're just too busy to get their bid to you, but they oftentimes don't mind if you are bothering them a little bit, but it's fine line. Pester.
Yep. So each subcontractor that you want to get a bid from, it's good to put a kind of a comprehensive package together of not necessarily a complete plan set, but a plan set that is pertinent to the work that they're going to be doing. It's expensive enough. Printing costs are expensive enough that you can't print out 100 sets of the plans. So you first off pick which pages of the plans are important for them to get all the information, copies of the specifications pages that are pertinent to what this subcontractor is going to do. And then I would always write out just a cover sheet that just listed everything that was expected from that subcontractor to provide in their scope of work. And, you know, again, something that's dated and filed and can be pulled out later if there's any question that there's something that they didn't agree to do. Because in some cases, it's, you know, 6 months later, 9 months later, especially subcontractors that come towards the end of a project, cabinet makers, you know, it might be 9 months later that they're trying to remember exactly where did this number come from that I gave you. So if you have a good record of that, it's pretty important. And to avoid conflict too, that there's nothing worse than a subcontractor who's realized that they've underbid a job, and 2/3 of the way through they realize they're losing money, and you're very sympathetic, but you know, it's a tough situation. So
Well, and that's why you need to be clear in the beginning if they are submitting an estimate versus a bid. And that again, you know, in that invitation to them has to be really clear what they're doing. Because if it's an estimate, I mean, it's just that, it's an estimate.
yeah,
You are going to have to, you're gonna have to sit down and work that out with them. If it's a bid, it's fixed. And sometimes, you know, they make out okay, and sometimes they don't. And I find something that happens here, and I guess it happens everywhere, but there are some people, they're licensed and bonded, but they do not like to do any paperwork whatsoever. And that's your risk if you would like to work with them. Some of them are super competent, very nice, but it is your risk whether you want to do that. Because, you know, we talked earlier about when the auditor comes in and wants to see that everybody that you've hired is licensed, bonded, and has the same amount of insurance that you do, all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes if people are loath to do the paperwork, or they just don't have the time, it's not their propensity to do that, you could get burned by that later. So again, when you're looking at subs, try and look at them holistically. And you as the contractor or project manager, whatever role you're taking, you just need to understand what kind of risk that's going to present to you. But don't think just because they are nice people, you've seen a lot of their work and they're lots of competency, that the lack of them responding to your paperwork won't come back to bite you, because sometimes it does with the nicest, most gracious people.
yeah, no, it's I kind of learned to pay attention to the bottom line number from a subcontractor, that if it's a big round number like $10,000 with 000 at the end, it's a pretty good indication that they just made a big wild guess. And if you get a price back that has, you know, down to the penny, you have a pretty good idea that they really put some work into, again, kind of same thing, material and labor for subcontractors. So, and there are times when, I've listed on the end here, there are times when subcontractors that I knew just didn't have time, I knew their number was too low, and I would just add a percentage onto it, knowing that, you know, I was going to kind of hold that in reserve when they came back towards the end of the project, kind of crying about how they didn't bid enough. I would have that contingency kind of as a backup. Again, it's great to have contingencies. It's just, does the budget allow it? You know, how much flexibility, how tight are things coming out? So.
And I think that is especially true now more than ever, because there is so much about what's happening in our world that is uncontrolled by any of us. You know, it used to be at the start of a job, you could, you know, pretty much guess that materials, you know, would stay within 3 to 5%. And now we don't have that guarantee anymore. And we don't have that guarantee with supply chain either. So contingencies become very important in doing any of this. And it's more so than I think ever in the 30 some years I've been doing this. Never really seen it like this before.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about contingencies too in the next section, reviewing a budget breakdown, because it kind of ties into with what type of contract are you working under. So again, with a lot of assumptions here, but we're kind of assuming that when we're putting together bids, getting bids from subcontractors, that we have very complete information. There are times when the information is not complete. If you don't have exact materials specified, there are times when the client and architect just haven't had time to make choices. They haven't picked their appliance package. At that point, you need to just throw a number at it just to have something in your budget. So it's really, the more complete the information is, the more complete and tight the pricing is. If it's a very loose set of plans with no information, the budget's going to be loose also. The challenge is to provide, even if you're doing guesstimates, to provide guesstimates that are based on some kind of reality that is not going to leave you looking kind of ridiculous later on. So let's see. So moving on, Sandy, if you could bring up that budget breakdown that I provided, we'll kind of go through that step by step. So this, again, a lot of ways to do it, a lot of ways to put together a budget breakdown, and this is the way I always did it. This one's dated 2017, so a house that we completed a few years ago. And this became a contract document listed in the contract as the basis for the price. And going through step by step, this is also what was presented to the client. So it's really kind of open information. So instead of giving the clients a big number, which comes up at the bottom, they are able to look at specifically where, you know, where did this big number come from? You know, I always used to tell clients, I'm just kind of the guy with the cash register, ringing everything up and ringing it up to the total. So you see a lot of numbers here from subcontractors, numbers from suppliers. The first actually go all the way back down to the first part. You know, price from the excavating contractor. So all these numbers you're assembling over a period of time, you know, might be a couple of months to get all this put together. Every time you have a tight number coming in from some source, you plug it into its spot, and the budget starts materializing until it's really like the last, down to the wire, the last minute that you're kind of adding in the final numbers to get a total. So starting with Division 1, and we went over this in the first class, that this is based on the divisions of a specification book. Division 1 general requirements is kind of a catch-all for odds and ends that don't fit in other categories. Equipment rental, outhouse rental seems kind of dumb, but it really adds up. Like everything, it adds up. So you need to have a place for all those things. Temporary utilities, power and water usage, heat during the construction process, dumpster and dump fees. That's a huge number, $12,000. That is in this day and age is not enough. It really adds up. The costs of disposing of things, recycling, it's terrible. A construction project creates a lot of waste. And unfortunately, we don't, in San Juan County, don't have a lot of options for recycling that. Down in the city, you can have companies come pick up all your wood scrap, everything, and recycle it.
And one of the things that you need to always work, you're working your schedule and your budget really hand in hand, because a lot of this, it's coordinated between the two things, right? And you can, if your project schedule goes over for 4 months, it might not seem like much, but you're going to start, that bottom line here where it shows that you've got some profit and overhead, that you'll start to shrink the more that you go over, because a lot of these things cost money. Financing costs money, the utilities, all of that. So just remember when you're putting your budget together to make sure that it's realistic with your schedule.
Yep. So yeah, first part is just some odds and ends, but all things that add up to, in this case, a total of $20,000 just for the odds and ends. Next part, site work, and that has become, site work has become a big component to a project, a big expensive component, just depending on how difficult your site is. If you have a nice flat field and it's all soil and digging is really easy, then your costs are way down. But basic costs of things like septic system, even that close to $20,000 figure is probably low. It's septic systems are getting up to $25,000, $30,000 these days. So a big component. Stormwater controls, rock hammering. There's this is an allowance in here for rock hammering, although that was kind of a fixed figure because we knew how much rock hammering there was going to be, but very expensive. So again, this is based on a pretty thorough bid from my excavating contractor, who is one that actually does a really good job of really dividing things out. And you see in there's a line item that says site sub support 10%. That is just something that we added on to all of the subcontracted elements, just the cost of supervising on site, what costs our company was going to incur by making sure that they were supervised adequately. In this case, it covers initial staking, just initial layout. So that has become a pretty important line item to cover supervision. The next section is concrete, and this is I'm trying to remember, we did that was the subcontracted bid, and again, that's definitely a big number. A lot of complex concrete in this house, including concrete finished floors. Now on steel, no structural steel in this project, which is unusual. Structural steel has become a big component in projects, big steel moment frames, in a lot of cases, architectural steel that has become an architectural element. So that is actually a low figure typically. Next one, section 6, woods is kind of a big catch-all for, seems like most of the project. The framing, the exterior, the big ticket items are in there. You can see the labor costs. It's one of the biggest areas for labor because it's most time-consuming part. So broken down into materials, and that 52,800 is based on a very specific material list, pretty exact.
And
labor.
yeah, I just want to say something here that when you're first starting out, you'll do, Pete mentioned this earlier, but a WAG, a wild ass guess. And you can kind of take, your overall budget and put your thumb up and say, okay, of my project, if I've got, say, $1 million I'm going to spend, about 40% of that I know is going to be under this category of woods. About 10% is going to be here. And you can start to put together a budget. Oftentimes you work these things from kind of the 50,000 foot level, and then you go down into the details. But it helps initially when talking with the client and the designer before you get all these bids back, is to get an idea of just how tight their budget is. And you can use some of these WAGs for just talking generally with people. If they say that they've got a $600,000 budget and they've presented you with a plan that is going to cost over 400,000 just for the framing and materials, it's just a good way to have that conversation. So when you're looking at some of these totals, they're not perfect, but you can use them, to have that conversation with.
Yeah, no, definitely good point, Sandy. And I actually could show, I have it filed somewhere, that with this specific project, very early in the design phase, I had produced this breakdown pretty exactly as you can see it. But like Sandy said, in each line item, I just made a guesstimate based on initial plans. I can look at a set of plans and go, framing materials are going to be about $50,000, and I'll plug that in. And I did that for most projects, and this one specifically, that I can just throw quick numbers within a couple of hours and fill all these line items and provide that to the clients and architects. Go, this project looks like it's going to cost about this much, and here's some things we can do. And it's great because as I'm getting finished bids back, I can kind of compare them to my guesstimate and see, where things are going, where I was off, or where we were pretty accurate, and possibly point out some areas that we can find cost savings because they really jumped up. So yeah, important part of the process is that preliminary budget. So I'll move through the rest of this pretty quickly, but yeah, basically every component of what it takes, there should be a place to put everything that it takes to finish this house, from bare ground to, you know, the classic turnkey, ready to move in. Yeah, thermal and moisture, insulation, roofing, door and window packages, all of, you know, glazing, hardware, doorknobs. Yeah, moving down.
And you know, this is where it can go any direction, right? When you get into the finishes, you know, I mean, this one says it's 105,000. That could easily be 350, or it could be 42,000.
Exactly.
So that same WAG that you use, oftentimes in order to do that on a finish, you've really got to have things spec'd out from the architect and you know, or the client, in order to get that down. Yeah, same with windows. I mean, you can see here, doors and windows, those are expensive ticket items.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So I see a question from Greg about giving a ballpark range from a very basic to standard home to a high end. Even that is tough to give a range. You know, I always had an analogy that I would tell clients when they asked what's the square foot cost of a house? What do houses cost in San Juan County? And I said, it's kind of like going to the grocery store and asking the checkout person how much a bag of groceries costs. You know, it depends on what's in it. And there's a million different things that that cost. So I always in my career, but oh, I just say I always in my career avoided ballpark square foot costs for houses. It's just too rough.
It is, but I think that, you know, right now, people will tell you, you know, if they're doing a custom home, I hear this a lot on Lopez now, that I could, you know, they'll say I couldn't do a custom home for less than $550 a square foot, right? So, you know, that does not include in there any of the initial excavation or anything like that, right? They're just talking about getting that house up, 550,000. But we have just at the land trust finished houses, and we know that we spent $250 a square foot. And one of the reasons, you know, that Pete just said, there's no way that he would venture into that territory, is you have to understand what finishes people are talking about. You know, it makes all the difference. The HVAC systems, if they're doing anything to do with, you know, a programmed house, that makes a difference, all the electronics. So you can imagine ranging between $250 a square foot and $550 a square foot in 2021. That is a huge range. And so unless you present somebody with more information, they are likely not to give you a number at all.
Yeah. Yeah, the bag of groceries, just remember that. How much does a bag of groceries cost?
Yeah, what do you have in there?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so everything you're looking at is the things in that big bag that you're pulling out. So Yeah, let's move on down to the bottom. So again, it's all big ticket items. Mechanical, plumbing, heating, electrical. So going down, yeah, so that's all the components. There's some big ones in there, like go down, you can see the light fixture allowance, $22,000. That's a huge amount of money for light fixtures, but that I'm pretty sure that's the number that the architect told me to put in with the client's agreement. It's like they hadn't picked them out yet, but they didn't want to scrimp. They wanted to have plenty of money in the budget to go shopping. And that happens, that in places where things aren't really defined, when you put an allowance in, you're giving the client an amount of money that they can take and go shopping. And it's tough because you don't want to put too much in because it's really going to skew that bottom line number, but you also don't want to be embarrassed later that you told us that we had $2,000 to buy lighting, and that can't even buy one of the light fixtures we want. So it's part of the challenge in a typical project where information is not complete. You're going to have allowances to provide. All right, so yeah, moving down to the bottom, we have subtotal. Profit and overhead, again, different construction companies do it differently. I like to have that subtotal number was all at cost figures. Those were my costs for everything. There's no markups anywhere in the whole budget, except in that profit and overhead figure. And I think, our overhead costs were probably, 12, 13%. So the cost of running an office staff,
All your insurance.
taxes, insurance, bonding, all those million things is probably, I'm not sure what it is nowadays, but I think at this point it was probably 13%. Profit was about 3%. So the profit's tight. It's always been tight. We finally, a company that I sold finally got it up to 18%, which allows a little more breathing room, a little more, chance at profit. But that is that's kind of what it's all about right there. paying your bills and having a little bit extra when the project's done. And then, at the bottom, sales tax, the good old payment to the state. So that's just a quick rundown of a typical budget breakdown. So one actually, Sandy, if you could bring that back up, just an important thing to note about this project. Most of the projects that I was doing in the last almost 10 years of my career, that bottom line number was not a fixed bid. It was an estimate that the project was done on a time and materials basis, that we billed at cost. But that budget breakdown was used for very specific tracking. So even though we're billing at cost, and costs may go over, they may come under, we're tracking very closely against those figures. And that has gotten pretty typical, that not a lot of contractors in San Juan County are doing fixed bid contracts for projects, just because of that too dangerous. But in a case where you have a very detailed budget, you can track with each billing. In my case, it was monthly billing. With each monthly billing, we could look exactly where costs were against what our projections were. if things started going over in one area, it gave us an opportunity to look ahead and find places that we could catch up. So yeah, different, same process as if it was being put together as a fixed bid budget. When you're using it as a tracking budget, the pressure is still the same.
Well, and I think it depends, you have to develop your own set of tools when you're managing a project. So if you are the kind of person that likes to develop a set of tools, like this budget and also the schedule, where you have mapped it out based on what you have seen on the plans, based on your experience and what your subs have told you, you can use that tool for your own management, for your own good. You can use it to discuss things with the subs. You can use it for the designer. You can use it for the client. And I encourage everyone to do that. Don't get yourself into a bind where you start developing one set of information you can share with the client, another set of information for the architect, and another one for the subs. You'll get very confused in it. So working with something like this and getting comfortable with being more transparent, I think helps your business basically, and helps you.
Yeah, it's all good management. Everyone's heard stories of projects that go south. 2/3 of the way through a project, the clients realize that it's going way over budget. They kind of don't know where costs are going. It's so common that it seems like almost a standard. So in the case that I presented, you don't get to that point. You're reviewing costs every month. So it's not, things can't get so far out of whack that it turns into a disaster. So yeah, all part of good management.
Before we leave this whole idea of budgeting, can you all see this where it says 9,100 professional architect engineer? Is that showing on your screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is that you can use something like this in addition to what we were just looking at, where you actually assign all of your QuickBooks account numbers right to the process, and do that all the way down through the project. And that's just another way, right? Another tool that you can use to help you to be able to quickly look at where you are at any given moment, any given week, etc., by doing a job by job search through QuickBooks and seeing where you are on the project. So again, just another tool to use when you are budgeting.
Okay, let's move on to scheduling. We'll have to move, a little quicker through that. Yeah, if you want to bring up that schedule, Sandy.
Yes.
And scheduling is definitely a similar process. It goes hand in hand with budgeting. In fact, a lot of times as you're putting a budget together, you're putting a schedule together, because information from subcontractors really kind of drives durations of things. And this is one, again, there's many ways to put schedules together. This is super simple. There are a lot of scheduling programs out there. Microsoft Project is actually much better than this in terms of flexibility. But again, it starts at the beginning, first week, first day on the job. I break this down into months and weeks. And again, this is kind of a presentation to clients so they can kind of see what's going to be going on any particular week. Highlight, places in the schedule that they need to have decisions made by. So yeah, starting working through excavation is first month, and seems like a lot of time, but every week goes by fast. It's to keep up with a schedule like this, you really have to keep things, you have to keep pushing. You really have to be aware of what's happening and what's potentially slowing things down, and look 2 months ahead and see, you can see 2 or 3 months ahead what is going to be impacted if that schedule starts to slip. Which of your subcontractors is not going to be able to show up on the date that you want them to show up because excavation is taking 1 or 2 weeks longer. So this needs to become a flexible document. As schedules change, if things go faster, you tighten things up. You might find other places down the road that you can expand a bit and give yourself more time. But as with the budget, you're always looking ahead. You're always looking at what's coming up.
And one of the things I think that you just train yourself to do is, and again, if you're using Microsoft Project or something like that, it points it out a little bit more clearly for you. But what is your critical path? Because sometimes the excavation is going on longer, but it's going on longer and you've actually got them so that they've excavated and you can actually get the foundation going, but they're still going to be on site doing something else. And so you begin to look at which part of your schedule is critical and where you've got a little bit more flexibility. And I think that as you train yourself to do that, you can then, bring your subs along so that they know where you're at. And remember, communication, as much as you can do it, check in with them a week ahead of time, whatever, and tell them where you're at. But yeah.
Yeah, so this whole first part of the schedule you can see here is pretty straightforward. It's not a lot of overlap. You can't start your foundation till after excavation is done. You can't start framing till your foundation is done. So there's not a lot of complexity in terms of one thing after another. Even in foundation work, you're starting to get some subcontractors in. Electrician might have to come in and do some rough in, plumber might have to come in and do some rough in. And then you have months of just framing, and that's that's kind of a big open category there, but still it's those weeks go by fast. And you need to keep pushing to maintain that schedule. But then things start getting a little trickier. Getting your roofing. Usually that if you look in October, week 4, that start electrical plumbing rough in, that's really a big target. Because there's those are the first of your subcontractors that are really crucial to the interior work, and that your critical path is really starts getting tricky at this point. You need to get that electrical and plumbing rough in done, temporary heat.
And you've got to remember to call your inspections on the day the inspector is actually on your island, whichever island you're on. Make sure you get that before you even start. Get that from the county and get those scheduled ahead of time too. Because that can
Yeah,
really throw you off. If they're in a budget, downtime, and they're only coming a couple of times a week rather than you're used to them, being able to come 4 days a week. I don't know if you deal with that on San Juan, but on Lopez we do. And you can really mess up a schedule by not having the inspector show up.
Yeah, the tough one is electrical inspector who's just here once a week, and every so often they don't show up on the week that they're supposed to. So you can get a couple of weeks behind schedule just waiting for the electrical inspector to sign off, and you're just pushing to get to drywall stage where you can cover everything, and that's got to be pretty epic. There's so much that goes into walls, all the systems, communications, wiring, heating components, electrical. It's just all these things that have to be 100% before they're covered. And you have inspections mixed in all through here: framing inspection, insulation inspection, sheathing inspections. So I always tried to keep this part of the project pretty tight, so things really clicked. But it's kind of fraught with hazard of missing targets. Yeah, the November month on here, crucial to get to where drywallers are inside. And during that time, my crew would be outside doing siding, all the exterior finish work. That all of a sudden is not critical path dependent. It's not as important, the outside work going on, as inside work, because that's really what's driving things towards the finish line, is what's going on inside. Drywall taping done. Give everyone a week off for Christmas here. That's huge. So, and you can't forget things like that. And then painting. The painters kind of take over. Not a lot else can go on inside. And then it's all the interior finish work, cabinetry, and all these things. The challenge is you're not trying to bunch these things up too much, but you can't build in too much slack time. You're sequencing things so that you're not getting the cabinet installers in before the painters are done. It seems simple, but happens all the time, that you have the cabinet maker scheduled for a certain date and the painters aren't done yet, and it's not going to work. It's just it creates a total panic. Everyone's all pissed off, and so yeah, the big challenge of sequencing things adequately and building in as much time as you can. But again, that bottom line is clients want to get in, want to move in. So yeah, all the things down to finish, finish electrical trim out, finish plumbing fixture installation. At this point, if you drive by a typical construction site at this stage, there's going to be 30 pickup trucks parked outside and plumbing vans, and you can always tell when a house is about done because there's no place to park. And then I have weeks of just finished details and punch lists and just odds and ends at the end, final cleaning, window washing. A lot of times that the cleaners are going to be at one end of the house and the moving van is going to be backing up at the other end of the house. And it's amazing how at the end, a lot of times it's tight. And
but
then
let's talk about the punch list for a minute, because that detail, and I think making that list, is really important, and making sure that everybody sees it. So you're putting it up somewhere where it's very visible, and you are checking it, and making sure you've got people assigned to each detail, and somebody is going around. I mean, even as simple as taking off the because you're going to have a final inspection, right? So you got to take off the little plastic coverings of your smoke alarms. All of those things need to be put on a list, because they fall through the cracks in every single subs and every employee's list. So just make sure, if you want to have where it says big party on the second week of May, you want to have a big party, but you want everyone to be pretty happy by that point. And your punch list goes a long ways in making everybody happy if you really have detailed that out.
Yeah, if everyone's not happy, there's no big party. That's
Yeah, that's right.
that's everyone's burned out, and it's like, see you later, and we're
Yeah,
on to the next job. But that's why that's kind of the ideal. Yeah, the move in. But yeah, punch list, the punch list that I have listed there were my punch lists that I would go through. It's the end of the project, is kind of chaos, everyone's spread out, and I would just go through and write detailed lists of all the little things that still need to be done. And you can get a sense at that point, do we need to get more people here? At times, like I said, there's no place to park, and you go in the house and there's so many people working that there's no room to get anyone else in. But with that pressure of the moving vans coming, it's one of those calls that you have to make sometimes, is with all the little odds and ends left, we need to do whatever it takes.
well, and it's
So,
surprising how things, like maybe somebody's run out of cover plates, or they've cracked the last few, whatever it is, and the sub's employee leaves. You're the one that's going to catch it with your punch list, right? So just remember, that's coming down to you. It's part of your management that you do.
yeah. And then the big kind of scary part too is that final inspection. Depending on who, the cast of characters we've had as building inspectors here, most of them were great, some of them were not great. Some of them would come up with stuff at the final inspection that was just baffling and completely shut things down, or some other thing we had to do that I may have never heard of before in my whole career, but not uncommon. So, I at times wish I had had more built in with that final inspection to be able to kind of anticipate things that came up. But yeah, it's all a crunch. I think this one was this a 1 year. I think this was like a 14 month project.
You did it pretty much. Yeah. 14
Yeah,
months.
yeah, and that was 14 months of all out, nonstop, go, full. I always had a policy of, once we started a project, there was a crew there every day until it was done. There was no, this crew needs to go to another project for a week because they need help. That just drives clients crazy when they come to their project and there's no one there.
Yeah.
And I actually, a number of times in my career, had neighbors kind of comment that we're amazed your guys are there every day and they never leave until it's done. It's crucial.
Yeah. Should we go back a little bit to what the critical path means?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys, when you're doing a schedule, right, like this, you want to make sure, well, we've mentioned this a few times, if you're going to have cabinets, you have to have your painting done. So if your painter calls you and says, sorry, I'm out 2 weeks, your critical path says, well, forget it. You cannot have the cabinets installed. You just can't do that because painting has to happen first. So in that instance, you're going to either scramble and get somebody else so you can get on with your critical path and get your cabinet person in on time, or you're going to send everybody outside and work on siding or something. So you understand how that looking at your path, right, your entire schedule, and finding those places that are critical. For instance, the electrical, you want to do cover, right? You want to get your sheetrockers in there, but the electrical inspector has told you it's foggy, I'm not coming, or whatever, I'm not going to be there. You know, you have 1 additional week. That becomes a critical point on your path because you cannot get cover unless you get inspected. So that's what that means. And then the punch list is basically things that are not on anybody's radar except yours because you're intimately involved with the project. And a punch list is just simply line item by line item, a list of things. That could be 40 things on there. Remove plastic covers from the the smoke alarm, right? I mean, you have to do that anyway for the inspector, but oftentimes the painters want them on, or somebody cleaning wants them on because they go off all the time if there's too much dust. So a punch list is simply a list of, very, very minute details. Somebody wrote on here, upstairs child window locks. Make sure those are installed.
Yeah. Yeah, if we had more time too, like Microsoft Project is much better at looking at critical path because it just doesn't let you jam things up too much. But
Yeah.
Again, like everything we're doing, this seems like a quick review of all the complexities of the building process. But everything we've looked at in this class is just basic to good management, a good, accurate, complete schedule, and good, accurate, complete budget makes for a smooth project with a big party at the end.
And how they become a part of your toolkit, for management. They're not just something you do at the beginning and then put away. You're constantly in interaction with them. They're your friends, basically. The budget, even though it seems boring. Yeah. So should we talk quickly about change orders and?
You know what, I think, Sandy, I'll bring that up in the residential section in the last class.
Yeah.
It's because we're kind of out of time now.
Yeah.
And just to note that next week we're going to be doing community development, right? Is that still the case, Sandy?
Yes.
You want to switch, and we'll do residential construction the last class.
Yeah.
So I'll do a quick review of change orders in that last class.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're at a point where any questions or anything we can elaborate on?
Now, Mickey did mention that someone suggested that maybe for an exercise, you all, take a project and put together, a sample budget, a sample schedule. And I mean, we haven't prepared anything like that, but to play around with that, you can go online and download a very simple shed or something and kind of map it out. We will also make sure that we send this information that we've used this evening to send to you. And you're welcome to play around with that. You can, estimate that you're building a 400 square foot small house, right? It doesn't have to be anything real elaborate, and walk yourself through all the details if you want. Kind of up to you, as you all are in very different, I think you're in different phases of your life in terms of learning some of what good project management is. So if you want something more specific, maybe talk to Mickey about it. And otherwise, we'll be sending out budgets and schedules. And again, that's just two ways of doing it. You can certainly purchase Microsoft Project and start learning that if you really think you're going to use it. I find using Excel works for me.
All right, anything else? Any questions or comments or?
Peter and Sam, this is Dave Williams. I have a comment, just a question. Good information that you shared. I would suggest something that I do and would be even more helpful in the islands is do your own inspection before you are ready for the inspector.
Yes.
Eyes of the inspector, like you were one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, good point, definitely. It's and it's kind of the advantage of it's kind of the job of the project foreman who's there every day, but a lot of times they're so caught up in process that they just don't have that objectivity. So I, as the contractor or one of my project managers, having the advantage of going out to the site and just running through and just checking everything for things that you miss stuff all the time that seems so obvious. And the inspector doesn't really want to be in a role of catching mistakes. They do a lot of times, but it's kind of frustrating for them. They're there to kind of check that you've done everything right.
Yeah, because
So,
that's
yeah.
you signed up to do it. But also I find that sometimes I will ask the inspector before they do the final, what have you been seeing? Have you been noticing any trends where you're doing the final and certain things in code have changed and we're all not up to date on it? Like for instance, the blower door test, sometimes we forget to do those. But anyway, asking the inspector for things like that just is helpful sometimes. Yeah.
But no, that's a good point, David.
I put a little note, somewhat of a joke in the chat about upstairs child window locks. So the place I'm sitting in now, we did a major remodel and I put 2 windows in upstairs that were less than a foot off the floor. The bottom of the windows, which required a child safety lock on each of the windows in case the kids were to get up there and they could easily fall out. But through all the inspections and including the final, that was what was found, was the child safety locks. And so he agreed to take a picture or have me get the locks, take a picture, email them to him, and then he signed off on us. But I got a kick out of it, even that.
We can also
Go ahead.
We can also talk about the times when we would leave something on purpose for the inspector to find, so he didn't notice something else that we didn't want him to find. That's important lesson there.
Oh yeah, and the inspectors usually know that, right?
Oh, yeah, it's big game.
Cat and mouse. Yeah, but a lot of times photographs are fine. As you get to know an inspector, and that's the other thing, I think the whole tone of this class is that everyone you interact with is, if you can have, a respectful relationship with them, it works out better. I know sometimes it's kind of adversarial, but but it does work out better. And eventually you do enough jobs and the inspector will trust that you can, you know, send in a photograph and they'll let you get on with covering or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think we can't talk enough about mutual respect for everyone involved in the process. Is just, yeah, it's just kind of bottom line. Even though the inspector can be a pain in the neck, you definitely respect their job and their role in the process. They're one of the players.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for showing up again.
All right. Yeah, we'll see you next week.
And we're looking forward to, you know, hearing about your jobs later on, how they're going.
Thank you, guys. Good course. Appreciate it.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thanks.